go. The recording just started. For those of you who have not been part of Webex before, welcome. There might be some new folks that haven't joined us before. I do record the Webexes for county feedlot officers who are unable to attend, and then I send out a link afterwards so that people can watch and listen at their leisure and still get the benefit of the training. That's one of the parts of Webex. If you do have background noise, or you're going to take a call, or you're talking to somebody, please mute your line. You can mute your own line by *6 on the phone, or just clicking the little red microphone button with the X next to it by your name, or by in your call-in user if you called in with the video, with the conference option. Please do not put us on hold, because we will hear your hold music and it will interrupt the presentation. So don't put us on hold, just mute the line if you need to talk to someone else. All right. With no further ado, we're going to get started. I do want to make one other announcement. I have sent out the invitations for the new CFO training. If you are a new CFO and you're planning on attending and you have not received an email or information about it, please contact me directly. And if you don't know who I am, my name is Samantha Adams, and this is my phone number. So contact me if you have not received emails about new CFO training and or you are interested in attending and you haven't gotten anything. All right. We are going to get going. It's 10:02. I think I wanted to let George take over at 10:10. We kind of have an exciting Webex agenda today. I wanted to say a special thank you to our CFOs on the training team, to Nicole way up north, and Darren and Morrison and Lenny down south. I just want to say thank you for setting up the agenda and getting our speakers lined up. Hopefully it'll be a good one. We try to go after the questions that have been posed to me of things that you want training on. So say thank you to your CFOs or your fellow CFOs next time you see them. George, are you there? George Schwint, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm unmuting myself. Hang on.
Oh, okay.
I'm unmuted now, so I'm here.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball to you, so to speak, George. And then you can take control and show what you want to show. I'll leave the lines open, and we'll see how that works, okay?
Sure.
All right. So welcome George Schwint. He's our engineer with MPCA, and he's going to talk to us about construction inspections and stormwater, right, George?
That's right.
All right.
Exciting world of construction inspections and stormwater.
It's all yours.
Okay, this talk will be really focused on concrete liner inspections. That's where we see the most types of LMSAs. We'll do a little bit on precast, specifically Weezer tanks, and a tiny bit on Earthen Basin as well at the end. And we'll talk briefly about stormwater to start out with. Right, so how does Minnesota Rule 7090 apply to feedlots? It's a stormwater rule. Well, as we speak, feedlots are not required to get a separate stormwater permit. Now, for CAFOs, those that have NPDES permits, stormwater requirements are rolled right into the permit. Appendix C in the general permit. If you want to know what the actual stormwater requirements are, look in there. It's the same as the stormwater rule. For non-CAFOs, those that the CFOs would be taking care of, there isn't a whole lot they have to do. all we have to do is follow the construction best management practices, basically our little fact sheet we have on stormwater. Now, it's important to note that the recent statute change that allows facilities the option to get an SDS permit may require feedlots to apply for a separate stormwater permit. It's not all been hashed out or decided yet. Depends on any rule changes that are going to take place and what the SDS permit actually is going to look like. So it may be a chance for not all CAFOs to be covered automatically by a stormwater permit through the NPDES program. It may be a little different in the future as we go through this. So just keep it in the back of your mind. There we go. So the basics of stormwater. If you're disturbing 1 acre or more of land, you need what's called a SWIP, a Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. You have to develop one. Doesn't mean we have to review it, doesn't mean we have to look at it, just means you have to have one on site. Now if you're going to disturb 3 acres or more, which would be pretty large construction projects, then you are required to submit with a permit application. That really is different than it was maybe 5 years ago. You're required to automatically submit a little SWIP if you disturbed 1 acre. But this is more in line with the actual stormwater program. They don't look at all the stormwater pollution prevention plans either. They just do the bigger projects. So that's kind of what we're looking at there. Now, if you're replacing existing pervious surface such as grass or cropland with impervious surface of 1 acre or more, you have to have a permanent stormwater management system. That's what you think of when you think of stormwater ponds, maybe an infiltration area for stormwater or something along those lines. For non-CAFOs, the basics are follow the BMPs laid out in the fact sheet. There are really no additional requirements. They can always get a construction stormwater permit, but the stormwater rule actually exempts them from needing a permit. It gives them automatic coverage underneath the stormwater general permit without even applying. This is all based on a 2004 memo that was done during the stormwater rulemaking process. So all they have to do is make the proper notifications, get the proper feedlot permit, and follow the construction BMPs, and they are covered with the stormwater. Okay, the construction BMPs, these apply to all sites regardless of the need for a SWIP or anything else. Some of these are pretty much common sense things. You don't want to disturb more area than you have to. I don't think anybody wants to do that. It just costs money to disturb that area. Stay out of there if you don't have to go in there. Control the tracking of soil into roadways, maybe a rock construction entrance, something like that. Working at times where you're not going to track mud on the road. Tracking mud on the road is something that we get complaints about all the time. So the neighbors will notice if there's mud in the roadway. Provide energy dissipation where stormwater leaves the site. Think of that as like riprap on the end of a channel to convey stormwater off the site, or a bale check of some sort to keep the water from running straight through the site. Sediment controls they have to have in place. It can be a combination of grass buffers, silt fences, hay bales. What you want to have those are around surface waters and tile inlets. You want to establish them before you begin construction. You can't establish them after construction, during construction. You want to have them there before you start moving the soil. What do they look like? Well, here's some examples. These are from a stormwater manual, so they're got stormwater grades in, but it could be a tile intake sitting there. It could be a small wetland of some sort in the middle here. You can see it's a silt fence around it, or they have sandbags on this one side. It could be straw bales. It could be something to protect the inlet. The stormwater program is all about erosion control and minimizing sedimentation in waterways. So there is also slope protection restrictions in the construction of stormwater BMPs. No unbroken slope of greater than 75 feet of length if the slope is steeper than 3 to 1. And if you're not going to be actively working slopes within 200 feet of a surface water, you got to get a cover on those slopes as soon as you can. And the different requirements are laid out there: 7 days if they're steeper than 3 to 1. If they're flatter than 10 to 1, and you're looking at 21 days, so quite a long time to have them open if you need to have them open. If you're not going to be actively working there, they got to stabilize those slopes. on, computer, go. Oh, too far now. Oops. So here's an example of silt fence. We've all seen this on the slope. You got to remove the sediment when it reaches a third of the height of the silt fence. Here's the actual requirements for doing a silt fence. It's not just put some stakes in and put some filter fabric on it. You actually got to dig a trench 6 inches down and 6 inches back, wrap around the silt fence, and backfill it. For CAFOs, I'll quickly run through these as this is good more information for you than anything. You got to follow all the construction DMP. That's for anybody. You look at these permanent systems when creating 1 acre of impervious surface. You don't count any previous surface that's there. Looking at just the new stuff. So they're building 1 new barn. They may have a total of 6 acres impervious, but the new barn itself is only a half an acre. That doesn't count to having a permanent system. And gravel roads are impervious surfaces. They're considered that. They're not considered pervious. So that's something else to keep in mind. The system has to be designed to treat and store or store a ½ inch of runoff from the new impervious surface. Doesn't mean you got to collect everything from, let's say, a new roof. It's possible if you collect half the roof on one side, you could meet your ½ inch of runoff total from the impervious surface. The rest can leave largely uncontrolled. Obviously, you don't want to go right into it directly to a lake or stream or anything like that, but it could go off-site without having much of any control. And something else to keep in mind for permanent stormwater systems, they don't have to be designed by a professional engineer. Anybody can design them. So if you get a SWIP submitted to you, what do you do with it? Well, hopefully they used our form. We have a nice form on our website. It's pretty straightforward. You go through and fill out the blanks, answer a few questions, check a few boxes. You do a couple drawings of what you're going to disturb, where your silt fence is going to be placed, any sensitive waters close by, and it's complete. Now, a little disclaimer here in this last bullet. This is not the official view of the MPCA, but personally, I have a hard time scrutinizing a SWIP too much because there's a field tile intake right next door usually taking in all kinds of sediment. So I don't get too worried about SWIPs as long as they do them, fill out the form, and have some controls in place for stormwater. That's really all I'm looking for. There's not a whole lot to do with stormwater. So I think that's all I got for stormwater. Here's a summary for you. A summary for CAFOs, develop a SWIP if you're disturbing 1 acre or more. Submit a SWIP with a permanent app if disturbing 3 acres or more, and requires a permanent system if you have 1 acre of new impervious surface. Non-CAFOs, you follow the BMPs. That's really all you have to do.
Are there any questions that you guys can ask, or you can chat them in too, and I'll. Not seeing anything, so.
Like I said, the biggest thing for stormwater is make sure they follow the fact sheet with the BMPs. They get the silt fence up before tile intakes and before water features. If the runoff goes out to a field that has a low spot in it, there's no intake in it, there's really no need to do anything. If it's going into a road ditch, or there's an intake in the road ditch or something like that, then you got to put up a little silt fence, prevent silt from leaving the site.
Okay. We've got a couple questions coming in, George. One, basically what you just answered, so do they need BMPs if the runoff doesn't lead to a surface water or intake? So that would be no.
No.
And then
you don't get to silt fence your entire site. You just got to protect the inlets and the water body.
Road ditches?
Well, if the road ditch has an intake in it or runs right to a drainage ditch, then yes, you'd have to do something, but it really doesn't go anywhere. not too concerned about it.
Okay. There's another question that says, who does enforcement when there are stormwater issues?
Construction stormwater folks that do that, we would not do enforcement properly. We turn it over to our other program that does that.
All right. Doesn't look like there's any more coming in, so.
Okay. Samantha?
Yes.
Yeah, this is John in Brainerd. Question for George. As I understand it, it's the permittee's responsibility to see that the stormwater issues are addressed and not the contractors. Is that correct?
Yes.
Because we've had some situations where the owner said, "Oh, I thought the contractor would take care of that," and I said, "Well, that's an agreement between you and your contractor, but ultimately, as permittee, you're responsible." And I'm assuming that's correct.
Yeah, just like anything else we do. If somebody screws up, a contractor screws up, we don't go after the contractor, we go after the owner. Our permit is with the owner. So he's acting like the general contractor and subbing out some of this work. If he subs it out to a construction firm, they don't do the silt fence, well, he's the one that subbed it out, so he's responsible for it.
Good point, John. Thank you. Any other questions out there that anybody'd like to ask, or any other experiences you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, Sam, this is Steve.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that on the construction stormwater one, sometimes if it is an NPDES site or site we've been involved with, we do act as the inspectors, but then like George said, we're out there in the capacity of gathering information, and then we turn it over to the construction stormwater people to do the proper enforcement. But a lot of times we're the folks, or a county, if they do run into trouble, are the ones that are doing the actual inspection piece of it. Just wanted to clarify.
True, I've had that experience myself where I've gotten a complaint gone out, and it was like a poultry barn next to a drainage ditch, and they didn't have any stormwater controls up. And I identified it and saw it, and then I worked in conjunction with our stormwater folks to make sure that the corrective action, so to speak, were put into place. And then a good point was made in the chat here that says the pre-construction meeting is a good place to clear up who's responsible for maintaining the silt fence and for just making sure that the appropriate, if there is a SWIP, the people have seen the SWIP. So, hey, look at that. George has got a slide on it. I'll let you
Very good
George.
segue. A very good segue
Perfect.
into pre-construction meetings. What's our role? We're going to start talking about construction inspections, obviously. So before we even start doing construction, we have these pre-construction meetings. What should be our role? What's our responsibility with these meetings? As our role is really just to attend if we can. The meetings are not for us. They're not for our benefit. They're for the benefit of the owner to clarify scheduling of his crews, talk with the engineer, make sure there's any last-minute changes that need to be made. We're really there as kind of, I think of us as like a bystander. We shouldn't be running the meeting. We shouldn't have a checklist we check off and do all these different things. We should just be a bystander there to answer questions that they may have about the construction process. Doesn't mean we can't speak up and say we want to be notified of certain things. We want to be notified when you're pouring a floor. We want to be notified when you're done pouring. But we should not be the one that's running the meeting. I've been to a few of these, and they turn to you and they look at you and say, okay, it's your meeting, you run it. I say, no, it's not my meeting. This is your meeting. This is for your benefit. I'm here as a bystander to answer questions you have. That's really our role. If there's anything you want them to notify you about or point out, that's your chance to do it. But you should not be the one running the meetings. That's my little preach on pre-construction meetings. So once you get past the pre-construction meeting, the rule requires construction inspections of liquid manure storage areas. Who must inspect these? Well, it's the engineer that designed the structures must inspect these, or a person they designate working under their direction. And there is no restriction on who they can designate. Technically, they could designate the owner to do the inspections for them. Doesn't happen very often, but they could do that. It could be a qualified NRCS staff person. So if it's an NRCS job, a cost share job, they could be doing the inspections. And if you're inspecting a concrete liner, you could have somebody that's ACS certified or MnDOT certified do the inspections outside of the engineer, NRCS staff person. So what should they look at? What do they need to observe? Well, they want to look at the subgrade conditions, looking at the moisture conditions of the soils, if frozen, is it too wet to pour, location of perimeter tile monitoring ports, and then repairing any defects they find, and looking for any unauthorized liner holes, liner penetrations, water lines going to the pit. We can't have those. That's what they should be looking for. Okay, when do you want to do construction inspections? Well, there's a couple of key points of construction. One you may want to go out and look at is after they dig the hole. Is the subgrade good? Is it uniform? Is there any bedrock that they encountered that they didn't find in the borings? Is it too wet to pour? So you want to look at the subgrade, make sure it's okay. Going out when they're doing the liner installation, when they're doing the floor pour, or when they're doing the wall pour. Looking at how they're doing the work. Is the rebar in the proper spaces? Is it all up to par with the plans you approved? And then afterwards, you go out and check for defects. Now, sometimes we'll get requests from a CFO or an actual owner to come out and take a look at it. A lot of times, the owner will actually want us out there. It's one of the few occasions they want us out there to make sure they're getting what they paid for, getting a quality product. And they like to have us out there, so there shouldn't be a big issue with going out there from the owner's standpoint. And then if we get some complaints, obviously we'll go and validate those complaints or look at complaints of construction. Okay, there are construction notification requirements in the rule, and the first one there is any change that's a change to the approved design must be approved by us. We can't just go ahead and do it. Now, there may be a case where a very minor change happens where the wall is going to be moved 3 inches. Well, we're not going to be concerned about 3 inches of movement on the wall. But if it's a large change, such as making the pit bigger, that has to be approved by us. If it's changing the thickness of a wall or a floor, it needs to be approved. Changing the spacing of rebar needs to be approved. All those things got to be approved by us. Notification of the CFO or MPCA 3 business days prior to commencing construction, and then within 3 days following completion of construction. So a 3-day notice on both ends. And then for concrete walls, they got to give us 3 days notice prior to backfilling the walls. Now, is it important they give us 3 days notice? 3 days notice is in there to give us time to get out there. Technically, yes, they have to give us 3 days, or we can make them take out the backfill, for instance. But a lot of times, you'll be working with a crew that'll call you the day of, and you'll get out there the next day, so 3 days really isn't needed all the time. They're not going to keep it open for 3 days as long as you go out there and take a look at it. And then there's a construction report from the engineer within 60 days of completion of construction, which includes our inspection form signed by the engineer. That's a pretty basic requirement. All right, so when you go on construction inspections, what do you take on inspection? Take some identification. A lot of times you won't need it because construction sites are busy. There's people coming and going at all times. Be 5, 6 different people a day coming and going from the site. But take some ID along in case they want to see it. Bring a camera, boots, a ladder if you got the opportunity to grab a ladder and can take it out there, take a ladder out with you. Grab a can of spray paint so you can mark up defects you see. Bring a tape measure to measure things, and bring a copy of the plans. A lot of us, including myself, think these are all cookie cutters, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're not. Sometimes there's special features that they need installed on the pit. So bring a copy of the plans along with you. What should you be aware of on a construction inspection? I mean, practice safety first, obviously. Watch out for construction equipment. They're not expecting somebody to be there right behind them all the time. So watch out for them. If it looks unstable, it probably is. Don't go in there. And One is don't enter a concrete pit when they're setting slats or beams. Those things can slip off and fall. You hate to be underneath one of those things if they fall on you. Park your vehicle out of the way. I like to park maybe on the road and walk in. I don't want to get in their way and have to move my vehicle or have somebody back in my vehicle. And then stay out of their way. They're there to do a job. They don't want to be chit-chatting necessarily all day long. So get out of their way. They're doing their job, and you do your job, and things will be good. Here's a picture of setting slats and beams. You see the big crane. These things get rolled out over the top of the pit, and then they're set. So don't go in there when they're doing this job. All right, so I'm going to go through each stage of the construction process and give you some ideas of what to look for. The excavation phase, you can see here's a picture of a triple wide hog barn hole dug. Looking for the proper hole size. Is it approximately what they said they're going to do? Obviously, it's going to be a little bigger because they got to have some room to work, but if it's double the size it needs to be, is it building the wrong thing? A look at the water table as though hole full of water. Is there water seeping in? Did you encounter any old tile lines? Do they have the soil removed for the footings that are required for the columns or pump outs? Is all that in place and ready to go? You see the picture of an intercepted tile line. This is an old one that's not actually functioning anymore. It's an old clay one, or a concrete tile, I should say. But see something like this, and if there's water running out of it, obviously they intercepted an active tile line. They got to reroute that around the pit. So that's what you could see when you look at the subgrade. All right, prior to floor pouring, what do you want to look for? Look at the subgrade condition. A little water, like you see in the picture here in the pump out, is not a major concern, provided they know how to pour and get rid of the water. They don't want to trap the water in the concrete. They want to push the water out with the concrete when they pour. Has the soil been removed for the wall footings, pump outs, and the column footings? Columns need footings. That's the long and the short of it. So if you get an engineer that doesn't put column footings in, let us know. They have to have footings. Is the reinforcement there? Are the forms there? Are the forms sufficient to make a 5-inch floor? Are the pump outs formed as part of the floor? That's how they want to have them formed up, not poured separately. Here's what the typical wall footing would look like. It's your 5-inch floor in the middle. Footings are thickened at least 3 inches, 8 inches. Some will do a 10-inch footing. Most of them will do 8-inch footings. And you can see here the column reinforcement at 8 inches as well. 5-inch floor with 3 inches underneath and rebar in it. All columns need a footing. I don't know how many times I can say that, but all columns need a footing. You can see the subgrade prepared. They're actually starting to pour concrete here. You can see all the column pads. All dug out. There's reinforcement in each one of them. You can see the subgrade's pretty nice and dry. Don't want it to be too dry or too wet. This is really nice to work on. This is a good site to be dealing with. All right, floor pouring. What do you want to look for when they're actually pouring the floor? Again, take a look at the subgrade. Did it rain recently? Is it too wet, lumpy? The reinforcement in for the column pads. Is a keyway being formed as they're pouring? Keyway is we'll get a closer up picture of a keyway here in a second, but it'd be along the outside of the barn. That's basically a 1 by 1 by 1 groove in the concrete. Is the wall steel in place? They can don't have to tie it into the footing. They can actually stab it in as they're pouring, so they may be coming along and stabbing it into the footing, and they're approximately 12 inches apart. Now this picture would be too wet to pour concrete. I think we can all agree on that. Obviously too wet. Now this is the same site probably a couple weeks later. This is a site that just happened this spring actually, and some of you in the southeast will recognize this site. This was a very wet site to pour. You can see some of the water that's actually getting pushed with the concrete as they go. This was the good end of the barn. They started working here and pushed the water as they went. That's okay. You can push a little water with concrete. You see this big red circle is a little hump in there. What happened is this subgrade here was very poor. It was really wet and slimy and muddy. So they laid down basically landscape fabric to pour on top of to get a good firm subbase. That wrinkle you see there is actually the fabric. So they got to make sure they get that flat when they start pouring their floor they're going to have, not their 5-inch floor. Another example of a floor pour, you can see this is a big screed in there. It's working their way back. See, subgrade's real nice. You can see right behind the tire they got the concrete, the column pad footing dug out, rebar in there. That's a good example. Okay, wall pours. What do you look at for during a wall pour or prior to a wall pour? Look at the reinforcement. So they got proper spacing. Or all this is the rebar pretty much level, or does it go up and down all over the place and not tied very well? Is the keyway clean? Is the water stop in place? Are the rebar all full of mud? If they are, they're not going to get very well secured in the concrete. They can get rid of the mud. Here's a good example of the keyway I was talking about. See a little groove in the concrete, the keyway, and here's the water stop right next to it. All joints that are between the floor and the wall have to have water stop in. Two different wall pours got to have water stop in. Wherever they have a cold joint, it's called. They stop pouring one day and come back a different day and pour again, they got to have water stop. You can see it on this rebar. This crew did a very nice job. They painted where the rebar had to go so they could keep it evenly spaced. It's really nice and spaced every 12 inches. Looks real good. Here's some rebar inside the forms. And I look at, is the rebar somewhat centered in the form? Now, obviously, it's going to shift a little bit as they pour concrete, but is it just all against one side of the forms? If so, make sure they know they got to push that back to the center of the wall when they pour it. You want to have it pretty much in the center of the wall. Maybe a little bit to the outside.
George, there's a quick question that said, can the rebar be in the keyway?
Yes. Yes, that's fine. Now, here's a rebar cage around a pump out. The thing you want to look for here is around the corners, the rebar has to be bent. One piece of rebar bent around each of the corners. They can't have a butt end, so one piece can't come in end and another piece start right next to it. They got to be bent around each of the corners. Here's rebar spacing. This is 12 inches on center. Very nice 12 inches on center. Okay, during the wall pour itself, here's a picture of them actually pouring walls. What do you want to look for? Again, look at the reinforcement. Is it okay? Is everything clean? Is there mud in some of the forms? Are they just working at a frantic pace to try and keep up, or is it too slow? Are they working at a proper pace? That's something you just got to learn to judge by being out at construction sites, the pace. I can't tell you exactly how fast it should go or how slow it should go. That's something you just got to learn. Here's them pouring walls with the big, large black tube you see on top is actually providing the concrete. And he's the black guy in the black suit actually has a vibrator in his hand. You see the little motor of the vibrator right there. And he puts a long rod down and vibrates the concrete to make sure it gets all the way to the bottom of the form and sets up real nice. Okay, on perimeter tile, what to look for is it 1 foot from the footing and is it below the floor? And is it working? Is it crushed? Those are the things you really want to look for. Pictures here for you. Like this tile here is actually a little close to the footings on the pump out, so we had to make them move it, but you can see it's not crushed. It has a nice, this one has a sock on it, ready to go and be backfilled with some granular material and then backfilled with the existing topsoil.
George, there's one other question. Sorry to interrupt your tile, but it was a quick question about rebar. So how much fudge factor for the 12-inch rebar spacing do you work with?
Well, again, it depends on the engineer and depends on the barn. Typically, engineers will spec out the rebar 12 inches on center, vertical and horizontal. Some engineers are pushing that to 14 inches on center. It depends on the engineer. And as far as fudge factor, a couple spots, if it's 14 instead of 12 or 15 instead of 12, not that big a deal. If it's consistently 14 and it's supposed to be 12, make them move it. But if it happens to be one spot where they got a little sloppier, a bar fell down, they quick tied it in, it's not a huge deal if it's an isolated incident.
Okay, thanks. Sorry to interrupt.
That's fine. So the tile here you can see has been installed. It has a nice granular rock around it to make sure it drains well, and it's at the floor level or below. Here they don't get their tile port lined up yet. Next picture will show it, their monitoring port. It's right here. So what they usually look like, a large pipe going down to that tile inlet. So they have a chance to look at it, visually observe it, potentially take a sample if there's a leak suspected.
Around the base of the barn, George, with the,
Yep.
There's a couple questions coming in about the tile line. How flat or level does the tile need to be around the barn? If there's some bumps in it, is that a big deal? Because I've seen it, you know, where it's got different variants with, or, you know, different, it's not flat.
I mean, ideally it'd be nice if it was flat, but obviously it's not going to be perfectly flat. If it humps up, if the bottom of the tile is above the floor elevation, make them move it down. So ideally you want to have, if the bottom of the tile is above the elevation of the floor, above the footings in that picture. Let me go back to that picture. You can see here, this top of the footing here is the top of the floor. So if the tile comes up above that, it's no longer at or below the floor level. You got to make it move it down. If it varies a little bit, if there's a little hump in the middle, and it's half the tiles above the floor, half is below, that's okay. It'll still flow and get its job done.
Okay. There's one other question that says, when is a sock or gravel not required for a perimeter tile install?
It's not required they do it. It's recommended they do it. A lot of engineers will do it. A couple will not. So it's not required. It's a good practice to do. Keeps your tile from silting shut, but we don't flat out require it.
Okay, there's no more right now.
Right, columns, beams, and slats, what you want to look for in there. Are they consistent with the design? Do they have rebar cages? You can see in the picture here. Did the beams rest securely on the columns? Here's the rebar cages you can see in the middle of the pit. That's where the columns are going to go. Here's an example of precast ones. These were precast brought in and just placed on top of the concrete. The beams you can see here nice and straight, nice and level. And other items you want to look for during construction. Do you ever see the engineer on site? Is he ever there? You may not run into him at the same time, but you can ask the contractor, has the engineer been out there taking some readings or looking at the site? If he's not been out there, there's an issue. Or his inspector, I should say, has not been out there. Are they doing some testing? How many concrete trucks are on site? A lot waiting in line. Are there 8 trucks in line waiting to pour concrete? I said, all right, that's a problem. They got enough crew members to keep up with the trucks. They're adding a lot of water to concrete. So the tests they're going to do at a site, you should see them pouring test cylinders. They have to do test cylinders. And here's an example of preparing a test cylinder. Here's the machine that tests it, and here's what it looks like when they test it. So they have to do cylinders, and that needs to be spec'd out in their plans and specs of how many they have to do. The checklist we have prepared tells them how many they have to do. I can't remember off the top of my head how many it is, but it's in the checklist. Slump. They should be doing some slump testing out there. Make sure they have the proper mix. And this is a slump cone, and basically you fill it full of concrete, take it off, and see how much it slumps down. That's all it is. Not a hard test to do. The air content, this is not required. It is recommended if they're specifying air and trained concrete, which everybody does. This is an air pot. It measures how much air is in that concrete. Again, this is not required. You won't see many engineers do this, but we do recommend they do it. let's talk quickly about defects, what they look like, and how to fix them. This picture here would be of honeycombing. What you want to do is, if you can remove any of the loose stones, remove the stones. And why is it important? It protects the steel that's in the wall. You don't want anything to impact that steel, which provides strength to the concrete. And it protects against leakage. I got some more pictures for you. Here's an example of honeycombing on a wall. You can see that the aggregate, the rocks of the concrete are actually exposed, and that needs to be fixed. Here's some in a column. Here's a close-up picture of, you can see the actual individual rocks in there. Sometimes you can actually pick them out if you want to. You can pull them right out of there. Here's how they fix it. They can smear it with grout. This is a grout fix. Just basically smear over the top of it to make sure it's sealed up and no water to be getting into that rebar. And here's an epoxy they can apply as well. Cracks. Cracks that go all the way through have to be sealed. How do you know if they go all the way through? That's a good question. On the floor, the walls, you can tell. The floor, you can't really tell for sure. The rule of thumb I use is, if you can get a credit card in them, you got to fix them. There's no reason they can't fix them all if you want them fixed. Again, it's grouting. Here's a big picture of a crack you can see here. This one's obviously thicker than a credit card. Needs to be fixed. See the nice paint I did on there? It's a wall crack. That's pretty small, but I tend to mark a lot of wall cracks, make them fix the wall cracks. I've seen a lot of water come into barns through a wall crack. Here's an epoxy fix. Fix up the crack here with epoxy. See the water seeping in there? That's not from the crack, that's from above. This barn has not been properly backfilled yet, so they had water sitting outside. And here's a grout fix. This is basically grout smear in the floor crack. Seal it up. Exposed rebar. Hopefully you don't see this very often, but there's times you will see this. Why is it important? Obviously, there's your strength and your steel right there is getting eaten away by manure. So you want to make sure you get that sealed up. Again, it's the same fix as everything else. It's sealant compound or grout over the area. Here's an exposed rebar in a column. Needs to be fixed. Mud balls. These tend to appear in like a rash, really. It's basically, there's no concrete there. It's just mud in the floor. There's no concrete at all, or maybe 2 inches of concrete and mud on top of it. I'll show you some more pictures of this. This one here, you can see there's no concrete there. It's soil. Same thing here. They can be pretty large. This one here is, I think it's Wayne Cord's boot, I think. The size of his boot. And sometimes they can be very small. And here's how you fix them. You fix them either by patching individual ones, which can be done in isolated cases. But if you get a lot of them, you'd be looking at an overlay of the concrete. In this case here, you can see they had to overlay quite a big area to fix the mud balls. This is one area of the barn they had to fix. Or clay balls, as some people call them. And how do you know what to even look for them? Well, you can see here, sometimes they'll be indicated by this colored concrete.
The teachers are at school now. I suppose we could have been able to say that. Could have, yeah.
Or in this footing here, you can see the concrete's kind of discolored, and you'll actually be able to take a rebar, just tap on the floor, you'll go right into it. So there's always a piece of rebar laying around, so feel free to grab one and tap around the floor and see how it sounds. Now this previous picture and this picture here are all from the same barn. And this picture here looks like a pretty decent pump out, actually. But if you look closely, you notice I stabbed a rebar into the floor of the pump out. That was luckily I did it before I took a step into it to see if it was concrete. I would have sunk up to my knees in mud. It's just mud. There's no floor in there. So what happens when something like this takes place? Well, you work with the engineer and the owner to get it fixed up. And this is the plan for repair in this one particular barn. They ended up cutting off 3 pump outs and replacing them totally. They ended up cutting out the footing along the entire length of this end wall. And all these gray areas were footing cut out and replaced. Time-consuming, costly measures to do, but had to be done. You see, they had to do an overlay because they had mud balls. And in the end, they ended up overlaying the entire floor of the barn, not even just one area. The mud balls are isolated to this area, but due to other issues with construction out there, they ended up overlaying the entire floor. So it can be costly to fix these things, so this is why we do the inspections, to make sure things are done right ahead of time. Occasionally, you'll see holes in the wall. The only time there can be a hole in the wall is if it's for manure transfer piping. Anything else cannot go through the pit wall. This one here, the beams, look at the beam spacing. You can see this beam here is barely resting on one of the columns. Not a very good thing. You want to make them move that more to the center of the columns. Make sure they get a good centering on the columns. And occasionally you'll see large gaps in beams. You want to check out the first 3 or 4 beams from the end wall and make sure they either touch or are grouted. That provides extra support to the end wall itself. After 3 or 4, friction kind of takes over and the wall can't move anymore. So check out the first 3 or 4, make sure they have some grout in there or are touching. And then this one here, you want to make sure that the columns are tall enough. They ran a little short here on their forms and ended up trying to use patio blocks from Menards as a shim. And we said, no, you can't do that. So you can't use patio blocks as shims. Okay, quickly on precast LMSAs, you see these occasionally. Majority of them are from Weezer Concrete out of Wisconsin. So what do you want to look for in these? First of all, make sure they have a plan stamped by a Minnesota engineer. That's always an issue with Weezer because they don't like to stamp them with Minnesota engineers for some reason. It has to have a Minnesota engineer stamp on it. Make sure it's a Pan-L built system, not the L panel. The L panel is not approved for manure storage. Pan-L built is. Make sure they're doing a Type 3 floor. The Type 3 floor is poured on site and has a large groove in it. You can see in the corner of this picture here, the wall actually sets into. That's the type of floor you got to have. Make sure they've done some soil borings. Weezer does not do soil borings typically. They'll be done by some third party, and the tile will be addressed in those borings. Right, during construction, make sure they're actually doing a Type 3 floor and have the big joint. Make sure they're putting water stop on all the wall panels. And we're still debating the need for the water stop on the wall and the floor joint. Currently, they pump it full of concrete. So we've allowed that to happen. I'm not sure we still will, but that's what they do for now. And make sure they're doing their tile thing at tile, which is typically done by a third party. All right, quickly on earthen basins. For construction earthen basins, it's very hard to look at specific items. If you go out to a site, make sure they're using a sheep's foot roller to compact the material. That's really all you can look for during construction of an earthen basin. Are they using a sheep's foot? And is it sticking the sheep's foot, or is it coming off? Can you pick up a piece of the material you're using and make sure it's sticking together good enough? That's all you can really do for liner testing that you can see on site. What you want to look for is damage or agitation. Make sure they have protection from damage, specifically concrete pump-out ramps. The pump-out ramps themselves need to be 16 foot wide, and the pads in the bottom of the basin have to be 20 by 20. And then why would you want to have them in there? Otherwise, you end up with features like this. They back down wherever they want, and they get a little moldal in the middle of the basin. What does it look like when it's emptied out? You see these holes, right? This one has a ramp and no pad in the bottom. So they put the prop down in there and started agitating away and blew out the bottom of their liner. So you see these holes develop. There's another one. And we will make them go in and fix these. That means totally cleaning up the basin and starting from scratch. So it's a costly fix. So make sure they have their ramps and pads as part of their installation. Okay, our role in the construction process, our role is basically check the checker. Technically, we're not required by rule to be out at the sites. Obviously, we want to be out there. This is our time to get it looked at and make sure we get everything fixed and it's built properly. It's recommended you get it at least once, at least at the end of the project before the backfill. Obviously, it'd be nice to go out there 3-4 times, but not all of us can be out that often. And then when can they use the LMSA? Basically, as soon as it's done, they can start using it. They don't got to wait for our approval, provided they give us the proper notice for backfill, obviously, that they finish construction. We had our chance to get out there within that 3 days. If we don't get out there, they don't got to wait for us. They're going to wait around for us. So they can go ahead and start using it. And how do you handle major problems? What if you see something that's way wrong or have a question about something? Talk to the engineer. They're usually more than willing to fix any issues that are out there, mainly because if the issue report to us saying they fix all the defects that we saw. So if they can't say that, I don't know how they're going to sign off on the project. Now, if we don't get an adequate construction report, they can be required to remove manure for additional investigation or repairs, and this just recently happened last year. We could not get a proper construction report, so we made them clean out some of the pits and go in and do concrete coring of the pit to make sure they had adequate depth of thickness of floor and adequate rebar spacing. So it was a costly venture, but it had to be done. So you can kind of approach it from that issue, with saying it's really, you either fix it now or you fix it later. Later's going to be a lot more cost to you, so it's better to do it now. The question that always comes up is, should you stop the construction process? You should rarely need to stop the construction process. So your best bet is to call one of the engineers or call a staff person at the PCA and get their take on it. Most of the time, fixes can be done later on. It just may be more costly. You could have to stop it if they're using a substandard material. Let's say they're doing an earthen basin job and the material they're using is not clay. They're using a very marginal material and they're not using the proper material. You may have to stop it then. But that would be a rare case. I don't think I've ever stopped the construction process. Now, we've come up and halted it for a little while once an engineer got on site and told them to do something differently or fix things, but it didn't stop for any length of period of time. So it should be rarely you need to stop construction. And then some other technical items that we have out there, some resources for you. We have finished a concrete pit review checklist, which hopefully you all are familiar with and are using. We have a big concrete pit guidance document. And as soon as I get comments back from the NRCS and Bowser and everybody, we will have our earthen basin design guidance document finished. And then we got some other future plans there that, as time allows, we get to, but hopefully we'll have an earthen basin design guidance document out January 1st. So I think that's all I have.
George, we had a couple questions come in while we were finishing up.
Yep.
One was, hold on. Will a stock for tile line work with no rock?
Hello, sock? Say that again?
Will a sock work with no rock?
No rock. Sock, but no rock. Yeah, I personally prefer having a rock around it, but a sock is supposedly supposed to do the same thing as rock. Keep the silt out of the tile. Like I said, those aren't required. Most engineers will do them, some will not.
Okay. Next one, do hairline cracks need to be epoxied?
Yeah, the magic question, how many cracks need to be fixed? There is no answer that I can give you straight out that you got to fix every crack or fix certain size cracks. Technically, the rule says if the cracks penetrate the floor, go all the way through the floor, all the way through the wall, they have to be fixed, regardless of size. The rule of thumb I like to use is if it's thicker than a credit card, you make them fix it automatically. I tend to make them fix almost every wall crack. Because I've seen a lot of issues of wall cracks and water coming into pits, or water going out of pits through wall cracks. Floor cracks, I personally do not get as concerned about. I typically will not make them come back and fix only one floor crack. If there's 3 or 4 of them, I'll make them come back and fix them. Or if they're very large, I'll make them fix them, obviously. But hairline floor cracks, I do not get typically that worried about, because that pit will have solids in it that will never really be totally empty, and they will tend to self-seal. So I can't give you a straight-up answer on do all cracks need to be fixed or not. If they're out there fixing cracks, you might as well have them fix them all. If you're going to call them back to fix a few cracks, well, then you got to make a call on how many is too many. I can't give you a straight answer.
All right, next question is this PowerPoint available?
It can be.
Okay, so they should just, if they emailed you directly, they could maybe get a copy of it?
It's so large with all the pictures, I don't think I could email it.
Okay.
I will see if I can have, maybe have Forrest put it in the CFO toolbox.
Okay. That's a good idea. All right, next one. Can the footing be a separate pour?
The wall footings, no. I've seen a couple of the column footings done as kind of a separate pour. That we have allowed. Ideally, you want to pour them all at once. I don't know the benefit to pouring them separately. I don't think there really is one.
Might as well do it while you're there.
Ideally, they should be all poured at once.
Okay. And last one so far is, how good are crack repairs and do they last?
How good are they? Do they last? I look at it as this is our one chance to make sure what we have when we looked at it was okay. Now, we all know concrete's going to crack more. We can't do anything about cracks that develop later on, so get the cracks fixed now before they get any bigger. How good are they when they're fixed? Depends on how good a job they do repairing them. If they go out there with household silicone and repair them, that ain't going to last more than a couple hours. You want to make sure they have a grout fix or some type of an epoxy fix. I like the epoxy the best. That's my personal preference.
Okay. Well, are there any other questions out there or comments anybody would like to ask George? Okay. I'm not seeing any more come through, and no one's speaking up, so I really appreciate your time, George, to come and go through this presentation with us. It's all really, really good information. It helps us do our job better, so we appreciate it.
Okay.
All right, with no further, do you have any last comments, George?
No, nothing for me. I'll give you the power back.
Okay. All right, well, you got a nice job. We appreciate your time. That's very good stuff. Well, we're going to move on to interactive discussion. So all you quiet folks out there, hopefully you'll stop being quiet and interact with us a little bit more. I'm going to let Allison Reamer out of our St. Paul office start off with a MinnFARM discussion. There's some requests for this, and just talk about some of the issues we run into and some of the stuff that we've worked through with MinnFARM. So I'm going to hand the power over to Allie and let her talk about the exciting MinnFARM opportunities. Not really opportunities, that sounded kind of dorky, but you know what I mean. Are you there, Allie?
I'm here. Are you gonna transfer over to my screen?
I just gave it to you.
Okay, perfect. I didn't get any. Let's see.
All right, maybe moving a little bit slow.
the first thing that I saw from Nicole, and Nicole, please check in if you want to or clarify if I'm not doing a very good job of it, but was to maybe put together a MinnFARM presentation of some sort just as a refresher for people. Instead of doing that and reinventing the wheel, if you go to the Manure Management and Air Quality website from the extension, there is a narrated PowerPoint, and I'm showing you my desktop now with it on there, that David Schmidt developed. That is a great, just overall, also would probably be a really good asset or reference for farmers. If you do a MinnFARM out there and they wonder what MinnFARM is all about, you can send them a link to this and they can go through the PowerPoint at their will to get clarification too. Also that's where you get MinnFARM from as well, so they could go through that too. Ed, if you're out there too, we had spoken. I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say or if we want to just open it up for people to ask any questions they're having when they're out there doing MinnFARM.
We're having a tad of technical difficulty, Allie. It's not giving you the control. So let's
okay. Do you want me to email you the link, Pam, and you can pull it up?
Sure, we can try that. Ed, did you have any comments or talking points?
Right now, I just got a few things that I kind of thought about when I ran into some MinnFARMs, just to get the discussion going.
Okay.
I was out on a site one time that we look at the compliance standard of using a type 2 wetland, a re-canary grass or something like that to take the material off and use that as a buffer system. And when we look at NRCS standard, they take a look at any wetlands on site as the end of treatment center. So I don't know if anyone else has got issues with that.
I've run into that a few times. Darren, we ran into that recently in Morrison County, didn't we? Are you out there? In cyberspace? I don't know, maybe he's not. But we ran into that conversation if it could be used as buffer. That's what you're alluding to, correct?
Yes.
Okay, what did you guys decide there in Morrison County? Or sorry, Morrison. Todd.
Todd County.
Brain
okay,
part.
Well, you know, I've always looked at it as long as we're taking material off, we can utilize it as buffer. We're getting that nutrients out of that and getting up on top of the hill, feeding it back through the cattle, and making it run and work very nicely. If they're actually going in for a cost share through NRCS or the EQIP or anything like that, then we have to use judgment there and if how we want to view the MinnFARM ratings. I know I have Greg here with me too, and he's listening in. He's had many more years of experience with this too. So, and we've always been with the soil and water working through cost share and how to get some of these particular sites funded for improvements, and use the MinnFARM or the flea vols in years back to have a good rating system.
I think it's it's a great tool. I mean, how have you guys or other CFOs out there too felt about, you know, we always get, you know, we get the comment that, oh, you can budget, you can make it work. I guess, you know, my thought on that, and maybe you guys can weigh in, is, you know, it is a tool, and we have to use it to the best of our ability to, you know, make the decision and put the best information in possible. You know, how do you guys feel about that? And maybe weigh in on that comment that we get sometimes.
Is my working? This is Tracy.
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
That?
Tracy?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Well, and kind of going back to what Ed was saying about the reed canary, if they can get out there and cut the hay off of it, then I will count it in the filter.
Okay.
And yeah, that type 1, type 2, I can see how NRCS would have an issue with maybe funding it because it's kind of borderline when you try and figure out what the rules, Minnesota waters of the state thing. But if you can cut hay off of it, yeah, you're removing those nutrients, and that is what we want.
I was able to pull up the website that Allie was talking about, the manure.umn.edu. You guys can see the link up here. This is where you can get the MinnFARM. If you don't have MinnFARM, which I assume most of you do, this is where you can get it. Here is the narrated PowerPoint too, which I didn't know this was up here, which is pretty cool. Especially if we have any new CFOs out there, this would be a good preparation too for upcoming training that we're going to be having, and just to give folks a good overview of what this tool is. I just started it for kicks and giggles so you guys can see. It looks like it's through Adobe that they've got this presentation. Ed, did you have a comment on that, you know, the idea that we can fudge this tool to make it work when we want it to work? I mean, how have you guys approached that when you've gotten that in the field? Everybody's so quiet today. Everybody must have perfect MinnFARMs with no problems and never run into 80 problems with them.
But what was Sam, that last? This is Steve down in Rochester. And,
okay.
And there is a bit of truth to that. I know with the old flea ball there was more of a fudge factor that you could make it do what you wanted to do. But there still is a certain amount of making the model work for the situation, whether you want it to be viewed as in compliance or non-compliant. One of the best things that I ever heard David Schmidt say was you make sure that you write down and document your notes as to why you ran the model as you ran it. You know, if that was based on what you were seeing, based on what you thought was happening there at the site for whatever reason. I think a lot of the judgment stuff has been taken out, but there still is a little bit of, I guess, what you want to say, playroom in there. So that's my comment on it.
Well, and I agree. I think that's a really wise idea, is to put in your comments as you're running it, you know, as you're in the field and you're looking at this and you're, you know, like you said, Tracy, you're talking about, you know, are they harvesting a hay crop off of this land? When are they able to harvest a hay crop? I mean, are they able to get out there in July and harvest it, or are they waiting until October? You know, just trying to figure out. A lot of it's how well you're communicating and how well you're gathering information is, I think, a big part of it.
Well, Sam, in case in point, I've got a site right now that I'm working on that the engineer has said, oh, these open lots are in compliance. However, on our inspection out there, it's very obvious that there's channelized flow right to the creek. You know, the lots sit about 50 to 60 feet off this fairly major creek, and so they're not in compliance. So the model will only tell you, is only as good as the inputs you put into it.
Very true. Does anybody run into, like Allie, you had an example of an odd situation that you ran into when looking at an open lot with MinnFARM?
I do. I have a situation down near Steve where the guy has sprinklers for his cows when it gets so warm. And it's based on temperature, and they're on and off based on temperature, and there is some discharge happening off that lot. Well, I guess I would like input from everyone too, if you have any, on where does that fall? You know, I mean, we don't have anywhere where we put volume of water hitting other than whether there's roofs or not based on rain events. So has anyone else run into this? Or, I mean, there is a discharge, so we can take it out of the MinnFARM context and say you need to address this issue separately. Does anyone have any ideas? I was looking into, you know, volume of water used and then factoring it into how often it got to that temperature in a year, but we still don't have anywhere we can put input for water in the model. So I don't know if anyone has anything, any other ideas or anything like that.
Does anybody else run into that? Any other folks out there doing MinnFARM seen that? Nicole, are you there? Have you seen that up there at all?
I'm trying to figure out the mute buttons here. Anyways, so what you're saying is, due to the fact that they're giving the cows a shower, you're wondering how to incorporate that amount of runoff in the RIM or the MinnFARM model. Is that how I understood that?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's almost like a broken water that's automatically discharging kind of a thing, you know, where it's not part of the natural order of things that's been factored into MinnFARM with the rain events. It's a separate event.
Someone had a good idea here that they just posted. Could you input it as more area 2, so more clean water entering the area? That's a good idea.
It is a good idea. I need to do some more research into, you know, what volume is coming off of the area 2 to know how much more to add, but that is a really good idea. I need to call into David to see if he's got any good ideas, or if we just say, look, that's an issue separate from anything that's causing runoff and address it separately. But yeah,
Allie,
it's a good idea.
Something that he's been doing just because of the the heat that we've had this summer, is this something that he does on his facility, has done it for quite a few years?
Has done it for quite a few years. He said has never had the system run as often as it has this year.
Okay.
And he's been there, I think, 20-some years, I mean, that he's been operating it. So this is definitely the worst case, which is good because then it gets addressed because it was seen, but is not a consistent event either.
Well, there's another idea tossed up that says use annual rainfall for the area and equate to a square footage.
Yeah. It's
so.
And the thing is, you know, it's only running because it's based on temperature when the temperature hits a certain point. So, and I was going to talk to him about the water usage and see what the system is. I am not as familiar with seeing these systems. I mean, I've seen them, aren't they more used in hog facilities when there's sprinklers?
This is Ed again. We're getting more and more of these sprinkler systems getting into these bigger dairies. And that's one issue that we're having to deal with too, is just the storage of our manure basins. And this is kind of an after the fact for these farmers. They'll put in the storage for their animals, and then all of a sudden they'll put in a sprinkler system, and now we're running short just on liquid manure storage. But on lot, typically, haven't seen many in the county here, but I can see it coming into play.
Well, really, how big of a problem is this?
Well, it's discharging to a ditch. So, I mean, if it was going somewhere where it wasn't going anywhere that we had to check, then I don't think it is a big, this one in particular is one of the major reasons why there is channelization going on to the ditch right now.
Okay.
Is there anybody else experiencing anything interesting with MinnFARM? I know a lot of our southern counties probably don't get quite as active with MinnFARM, but I'm sure they probably use it occasionally with some of the smaller sites. Might not have. Go ahead.
This is Nicole. As for MinnFARM for the northern counties, now I'm assuming you guys are all listening in on this up here, northwest Minnesota, but it's used seldomly. Now, whoever's listening in on this, you chime in and tell me I'm wrong, but it's not used a lot. My experiences for West Polk, I used it when I was dealing with the UMC. I call it the Horse Palace, but the horse arena out there when they had some issues with their stormwater pond. And dealing with one of the doctors out there, he got on MinnFARM and went ahead and redid the numbers and manipulated them and made a point of bringing that to my attention at one of the meetings that we had out there. And the only thing I could tell him is just a tool, you know, and that's, as Allie had said earlier, it is just a tool to help, but make your notes like Steve said. That's, you know, other than maybe a couple times I've used it up here, I don't know about the rest of the folks up here in northern Minnesota, but it's a good tool to have, I guess.
Well, and I mean, it's supposed to aid in your professional judgment. It's not the live-all, end-all. I mean, you got to get out there and you know what's going on out there. It's just basically to reinforce what's going on and to clarify questions when you have them as to what's going on out there.
Well, I wanted to clarify, too, that the southeast counties do use MinnFARM on a regular basis. They have a lot of dairies. I don't want to taint the brush that we're the only ones that have open lots up here. So I do appreciate that comment, though, that it is a tool. And I think we need to keep it in our toolbox. It's just like anything else we use to get maybe a try to apply the best science that we have to some of the work that we do, because some of it is tough. And that's why these opportunities are really important, that we interact. And so if anybody else has run into anything unique, please feel free to bring it up. Sometimes you experience something and you figure out an answer, and someone in the next county experiences the same thing, and they have to go through the same process to get the answer. So, you know, it's good that we have this opportunity to talk. So keep talking. And there's another comment that came in. Our sprinkler system's adding a significant amount of runoff. They typically just want to mist. Too much cold water can be bad for cattle. So, I mean, maybe we're overthinking the sprinkler system, too. I don't know. I've seen the ones in the dairy barns that mist, but I don't know if they're raining or misting in, like, the feedlot situation. Maybe we're overthinking it.
Well, right, and that's where I am kind of leaning towards this being a separate issue, that he needs to be able to contain that and not have that, and have that be part of the discharge. And if that's contained and dealt with, maybe there isn't a runoff issue. You know, maybe without that contributing water pushing, he's able to contain the rest of the runoff before it gets to that ditch.
Well, how is everybody feeling about MinnFARM? We're doing the new MinnFARM training at the new CFO training. Are there any other needs out there to do anything else with it as far as training or questions or anything like that? Feel free to chat or speak up. I want to get everybody in as possible. And I also would encourage folks to check out that narrated PowerPoint. That looks kind of cool.
Sam, this is Tracy. We had an unusual, well, David didn't have a real good answer for it, and so I have a site that he has 2 lots that essentially end up in the same spot, and the first filter feeds into the second filter. And so what we did, we being the engineer working with NRCS, is we made sure that each filter was treated by the end of the filter all by itself, and then used it as 2 lots, and so that our grouping number was working. And so we did not give any credit on the second filter treating the first one more. That first one had to stand alone. And then the second one had to stand alone, and all of that first filter water was area 3, or area 2. let's see, area 3. So
I get a mixed up too. I always have to look at
yeah,
the guide.
right. So they had to stand alone, and then they had to go together and still have that number small enough at the end. Because David hadn't seen where one fed into the other. It was just they both impact the same water source, but two separate ones. Well, they do and they don't, and so and we probably over-designed it a little bit because we wanted to make sure that whatever little bit is off the first filter that's going into the second is not increasing that nutrient load so much that the second one can't compensate because there's no way to put it in there.
Good point. Yep.
So.
Well, does anybody else have any other final comments or questions? Good. All right. Thank you, Allie, for starting that out and giving us the information. And folks, please feel free to interact with her about MinnFARM too. If you don't know, she is working on her master's with David Schmidt, so hopefully that's okay that I just shared that, Allie.
Oh yeah, that's fine. And thank you, Ed and Nicole and Tracy and everyone that interacted too. It helps to get other input and feedback.
Good. Well, we've only got about 9 minutes left. Anybody have any pressing Delta questions? I know we've beat Delta to death. But if you have any pressing questions, please throw them up and I'll do my best to answer them. If not, our training team will probably bring it up soon, or I will bring it up with the training team. We're talking about doing a Delta refresher for the new CFO, well, Delta training for new CFOs, and a refresher for administrative staff that may want more training on it, and or CFOs that want a refresher, maybe in the beginning of October or the beginning of November. May want to wait till after MAXFO, I'm not sure. Hopefully we can get some feedback from you guys on how many people might be interested in doing that. Any comments on Delta? All right, looks like we're losing people. People are kind of tuning out now. I say the word Delta and I hear like 5 phones hang up, so I think that's a good cue for us to end the day. I'm not seeing any chats or end our Webex. Thank you to our speakers again and the discussion that we've had. It was much appreciated.
Hey, Sam?
Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I do have one quick question. If there's CFOs still out there, is anybody else experiencing a issue with printing, say, forms out of Delta? If they are, if they want to share that, I'd like to know. I've got a couple counties right now that I'm working on. So,
did you guys please respond if you are experiencing issues? Printing is okay for Lenny. He's doing all right with it. He hasn't had any problems. Anybody else had issues with printing? Darren and Morrison said nothing lately. Things are going well.
Okay. I just thought I would check in and see if there was anybody else that was having problems. So, okay.
All right. Thank you, Steve. If there's anybody with questions out there about new CFO training, or you know of a new CFO that I have not contacted, please help out your fellow coworkers and get them in contact with me so we can make sure they're getting to the training. But let me tell you, keeping up with everybody's email addresses is not always fun. So have a wonderful day and a wonderful weekend before the start of school. And we will see you all at our Webex in October, maybe. All right. Bye-bye. Good job, guys. Thank you.